One of the most important things to me in a movie is how does it make me feel? Is it using all of the many storytelling elements, light, color, sound, to immerse me in the world of the film? Well, I can't think of a more unique example of this than the 2002 film by Paul Thomas Anderson, Punch Drunk Love. In the film, we meet Barry Egan, an extreme introvert who has no idea that his life is about to change. We go from absolute silence for the first several minutes to a sudden explosion of sound. To say that it's an odd way to start your film is a bit of an understatement. And it immediately makes us feel uncomfortable and disoriented. A little bit out of sync with the real world. And that's what this film is all about. Punch Drunk Love would mark director Paul Thomas Anderson's fourth film. And although it's ultimately a love story, it's also about a man who sells novelty plungers for a living. And about buying pudding for frequent flyer miles. And about being extorted by a greasy mattress salesman that also happens to run a phone sex line. To understand where this film lands, you need a sense of where the director has been. His previous features start with the low-budget casino drama, Hard Eight, a fast-paced Goodfellas-esque look at the 70s porn industry, Boogie Nights, and finally, the relentless 3-hour emotional roller coaster, Magnolia. To me, all three of these films feel like a progression of emotional filmmaking that would peak with Punch Drunk Love. But I'm going to focus on Magnolia for a moment because I believe it has a direct influence on why this film was made.
Let's just do Magnolia. I'm going to do the same question again. In your mind, what is that movie about?
My dad.
The whole thing.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I just lost my dad, and I wrote a movie.
Magnolia is an incredibly ambitious film, following 9 seemingly unrelated characters, all dealing with different stages of familial trauma and grief.
I'm gonna cry. I'm not gonna cry for you.
It is a sprawling and unwieldy, raw nerve of a film that climaxes in the most peculiar way.
I remember talking to an oncologist on the phone who was essentially telling me that there was no way my dad was going to make it. And one of the first things that popped into my mind was, you know, you're telling me that frogs are falling from the sky.
Oh, the frogs falling from the sky.
So he shifted from a huge, explosive, melodramatic ensemble to an uncomfortable, romantic comedy starring Adam Sandler.
Did you want to change after Magnolia? I mean, did you say basically, look, I just did some very heavy film with a lot of heavy talent. You know, let me go in a different direction with someone who has a different kind of temperament.
Completely. You always want to get away from where you were last. Your just instinct is always like, I want to go left. You know, I can't stand any more cancer. I can't stand any more sadness.
I think the first thing that we have to understand about Punch Drunk Love is that the events are far from literal. This is fantasy. He's using emotional logic and metaphor to amplify Barry's state of mind. So when the harmonium shows up in the first few minutes of the movie, it's almost like coming in contact with the monolith in 2001: A Space Odyssey. And in a previously silent and awkward world for Barry, the moment he takes that harmonium, music begins to enter his life.
Before we see the first clip, and we've seen the trailer, tell me what this movie is about and why.
It's about getting in tune. It's a love story between Adam and Emily.
Right.
About a guy with 7 sisters.
Right.
With 4 blonde crazy brothers coming after him. And it's just about getting in tune and finding your music, I think.
And while there are many different aspects of this film worth mentioning, the color palette alone could warrant its own video. I think the most important element is its rhythm. So let's talk about music. Up to this point, John Bryan had worked with Anderson on every single one of his features, starting with Hard 8. But it wasn't until Punch Drunk Love that his music became so crucially integrated into the storytelling.
In the case of Punch Drunk, we were talking about how the theme should be integrated. We were working on it before they started shooting the movie. Then there were things written on top of that. Then there were things written to the completed movie. It was a completely integrated process.
We can see how in the progression of the film, Barry's state of mind dictates the music that we hear. When he's feeling lonely, then we are generally in silence. When he's overwhelmed or angry, we get these random sounding drum beats mixed with sounds from the environment, like the whiz of a spring or the rip of duct tape.
We wanted to blur the line between soundtrack and sound design. We were out on the street in front of the pre-production office one day talking, and I suddenly got struck, and I was like, I think what you actually want is the thing to feel like a musical, but nobody ever breaks into song. He went, exactly! And I was sort of jumping up and down going, I can get behind that.
Punch Drunk Love. What movies informed that movie for you?
Fred Astaire, Ginger Roger movies.
Really?
Yeah, because they were a guy and a girl. They were musical, and they were 90 minutes. The girl always had a nice flowing dress on. And coming out of Magnolia, man, I swear it was all like getting through Magnolia. All that I could do to keep my head above water was to watch Adams movies, was to watch those musicals.
That's what they were invented for. But it was for the country to get out of the depression.
They fucking work.
And this brings me to the use of the song, He Needs Me. And if you've seen this film before, then whether you liked it or not, the song was probably stuck in your head for hours afterwards. The song originates from the musical from 1980 starring Robin Williams and Shelley Duvall, Popeye. Now, Anderson has openly admitted that Robert Altman is one of the pivotal influences in his career, and it's easy to spot the similarities, particularly with how he likes to build huge ensembles where characters chaotically weave in and out of each other's lives. So when Anderson starts putting together his own version of a romantic musical, it makes total sense to incorporate the love theme central to Altman's own. And there is an absolute surreal alchemy to it. In the moments where this song plays, you can feel Barry's heart swelling with love. The love that we only feel when we finally find someone who gets our wavelength. There is something so incredibly internal about this film. Every note expresses the emotional turmoil or overwhelming joy inside of Barry. And in 90 minutes, we go from a lonely, overwhelmed man to someone who's finally able to stand up for himself.
I have a love in my life. It makes me stronger than anything you can imagine. I would say that's that mattress, man.
And that's exactly why this movie speaks to me so deeply. It feels like Paul Thomas Anderson ripped a hole in my brain and flipped it inside out to show the audience. It takes the most uncomfortable internal feelings and amplifies them into special effects. And through all of these odd anachronisms, random events, and raw emotions, Punch Drunk Love hits every note perfectly.
So you